I'm joined by Jacqui Honess-Martin, writer and creator of the new ITV drama Maternal. Jacqui, thank you so much for joining me today. First of all, I want to say congratulations. I binged the whole series of Maternal in a couple of evenings, and I thought it was brilliant for reasons that we'll go into. But to start off with, could you give the listeners a bit of background about what the show is about and how the idea for it came to you?
Of course, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's lovely to be here. So Maternal is about three mothers who are returning to frontline NHS medicine from maternity leave. They've all just had children and they've taken sort of 9 months or 2 years out and everything in between. And those three women are Mariam, who's a paediatrician, so she's going back to treat children, Catherine, who's a general and trauma surgeon, and Helen, who is an acute medic. And it's about how hard it is to be an NHS doctor at the moment and how hard it is to be a working mother and how we tend to face those things with humour and resilience and a lot of joy. Certainly that's my experience of the women that I see going to work every day, and it's definitely my experience of doctors. They have a very black sense of humour and they certainly find joy and curiosity. And I think one of the biggest things I learned writing the show is that medicine is not a science, it's an art. And I think that's the thing that doctors really enjoy, human beings. They enjoy figuring out what's wrong with them. And that's about getting to know a human and who they are and who people are, as much as it is about knowing, about bacteria or microbiology. And the idea came to me. I went back to work when my first little boy was 6 months old, and I went back full time. And I just found it incredibly hard. I wasn't expecting to find it incredibly hard. I worked in a very inclusive industry, returning to a job that I'd loved. And I beat myself up about how hard I found it quite a lot. And then I started talking to other people who were in similar situations or who'd been through similar things and realised that it wasn't just me, and that there was a universal experience that women were having trying to go back into workplaces and structures that were not designed for women coming back from maternity leave or really for women with young families. And at that point I went, oh, okay, well, instead of beating myself up, I'm going to get angry and write a play about it. So I did. And eventually that play became Maternal. I had two friends who really inspired me to write it, one of whom is a paediatric cardiologist. And she has a little boy who's the same age as my first little boy. So we were both going back to work at the same time. And I was listening to some of the stuff that she was doing, and really that's where Maternal came from, was just thinking, God, I'm so in awe of how this woman is coping every day. And one of my dearest, oldest friends of 20 years is an acute medic up here in Yorkshire, where I live. And I got commissioned to write the show in March 2020, in the week that we were going into lockdown. So whilst I was trying to write episode 1, I just figured, well, no one's really going to read it beyond TV industry people at this point, because it was just in development. No one had greenlit it. So if the medicine's a bit shonky, it's not the end of the world. So I got myself a few textbooks, 100 cases in paediatrics, 100 cases in surgery, and 100 cases in acute medicine. They're still up on my shelf. And they give you a presentation and an answer. I guess it's an exam kind of cramming tool. So I just took cases out of that. I watched a lot of ER with the subtitles on and just copied down stuff they were saying. And then I called my dear friends who were in the middle of coping with COVID, and they were like, how much PP on if you got on at the minute? Can you talk to me? Because I've got this question about... And they were extremely generous. And then when the show actually got greenlit and we were writing these episodes properly, we had 3 amazing medics work with us. That friend... and then 2 others who were sort of found through various different recommendations in social media, Zoe Barber, Kieran Rahim and Adrian Kennedy. And the best moment was when they looked at episode 1 and went, okay, so if we start with the bit where if Catherine did that, she would kill the patient, should we rewrite that? Just quite a relief, because you don't want to think that you can just read a couple of textbooks and watch some ER and you're all good to perform, cardiothoracic surgery.
So I think a lot of what these women are going through will be very relatable. There's a moment in it where I'm watching it and I'm like, yep. And I don't think there will be a working mother watching who hasn't dropped their kid off at nursery knowing like, oh, this is a little bit on the edge here.
No, that's
like,
fine. They've had one shot this morning. They might not have two more before 3 o'clock. It's going to be,
Yeah, and you're like,
are you going to get
God,
that phone
please,
call?
please.
Yeah.
I've got a meeting that I have to be
Exactly.
okay to do today.
God,
like,
let the cow pole last. Yeah.
Exactly. Is that sort of why you wanted to use doctors? Because I was watching it thinking like, oh my God, like, what do you do if you're a doctor in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it was that sitting at my desk, and my hardest moments when I went back to work was always, it still is actually, when I'm tired. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's something about, I live in Leeds, so it's usually it's like Mordor, between sort of November and May. It's dark, it's bleak, it's grey, and it gets to 4 o'clock, and I used to just cry, and I couldn't understand what was wrong with me until I realised it's just 4 o'clock. It's okay, let it out. You have something to eat, have some more caffeine, get a bit of sugar, you can keep going. And I'd be sat there at my desk thinking, okay, just respond to low stakes emails. That's all you've got to do, is just like do some housekeeping, do some admin. And then I was speaking to this friend of mine who was talking about, I was on call all weekend, or I was in clinics today, and I just thought, well, you can't do that. You have to be on it the whole time. How do you do that when you're exhausted, or when you've had a dreadful night, or when they're teething, or when they're ill? And I think there are a lot of jobs where you really do have to show up, and medicine is one of them. I was speaking to a friend of mine she's got a 1-year-old, and she was due in court the other day, and her little boy had the same thing of, just trying to hand him over at the nursery gate, and them saying, no, he's still, chicken pox still, these pox are still having the row about how far on with chicken pox they are. And she's like, I'm due in court at 9 a.m. What do you want me to do with this child if you don't take him? So I think that is a universal experience for all mothers. And yes, I absolutely chose medicine because I think it's the most extreme, because those are the people I'm most in awe of. And also because I think, I don't know about you, but when I had kids, I couldn't watch those missing drama kid stuff.
No, it changes you, I think, fundamentally.
It really does. It really does fundamentally change you. And I didn't want to believe that before I had children, because I don't know, I don't sort of subscribe to the idea that having children is the be all and end all of a woman's life at all. But it does change you, I think. I mean, it ruins all of those dramas. So don't have kids. Keep enjoy missing. And I thought, God, how do you go back and do pediatrics if suddenly the image of a broken child is your child? And I remember speaking to my friend about this and saying, do you think it's changed you? And actually, I ended up putting a line into the show. It's hers. But she said, I used to feel pity for the parents, and now I can't hold it together if I have to break news like that to people. And ultimately, she thinks it's made her a better doctor, but it's certainly meant she's had to readjust those barriers. I think you work hard as a medic to build that wall up so that you can do your job properly. And being a mother completely knocks it down. You have to build it in a completely different way.
So the show surprised me in a lot of ways. I think, like, if you're seeing an advert for it or whatever, you might be thinking it's about, quote unquote, because obviously this is a feminist podcast, so this is not my view, but you might be thinking it's about women's stuff, in inverted commas.
Women's issues, yeah.
Which, it is, but women's stuff is everyone's stuff. But it is a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be. And I don't want to blow smoke up your arse here, Jacqui.
Oh, no, go on, it's fine, Jan.
All right, I will do then.
Carry on.
But it is one of the most nuanced, sympathetic, but also kind of like real examinations of the current state of the NHS, and I think the people working within it. And I've never really seen this representation of the NHS on screen, and maybe it's because we have just sort of got to this point where we are now. It's really timely. Was it always your intention to sort of tackle these issues?
Thank you, first of all. I'm really pleased that you took that from it. I think it was, but I think, and when I say this, I have to be really careful that I'm not disparaging to these writers, because I think they're extraordinary, but I'm not James Graham, so I don't start from a place of, I mean, I'm assuming he starts from this place. So James, if you're listening, I apologise wholeheartedly, and let's talk about
it.
He
is listening.
I don't start from a place of wanting to make a political point. I start from a place of seeing something that makes me angry, or some conflict, or something where I go, oh, that would be worse. Like, me sitting at my desk trying to write emails at 4 o'clock in theatre where if someone dies, it's a really bad day. So yes, there was something I guess I wanted to say about the NHS, and that was that, and bear in mind, I started writing this at the beginning of March 2020, so we knew that what was happening with COVID was going to be seismic for our health service. And I think we also had a sense that it was going to kind of be a new chapter, that the way that we related to the NHS was going to be fundamentally different after this crisis had happened. And we were right about that, but we didn't know exactly how. And what I was seeing were my friends going into work with all of the stuff that was going on in their life and trying to hold it all together in the face of this extraordinary thing. Sort of what they do every day, but amplified and magnified. And when we were standing on doorsteps clapping, and I used to get really cross about, upset about those signs of superheroes. Like, they're not superheroes. They're not superheroes. They're human beings who are sacrificing a huge amount to go and do this, to go and face this thing. And actually, that's what they do every day. And it is what you sign up for as a doctor. But I don't think you sign up for the system in the way that it is at the moment. I don't think you sign up for a system that's as broken as it is at the moment. I was listening to a podcast the other day about the railways, actually, thrilling as that was. And it was about this idea that lots of the railway franchises are failing because they ultimately rely on goodwill. So once drivers say, we're not doing that overtime anymore, the whole thing falls apart. I was running while listening to this podcast, and it's hilarious watching me run to a podcast because I start shouting in the middle of the park. I get so exercised at what I'm listening to, run out of breath, getting cross. But I was like, yes, that's the entire public sector. Yeah. It relies, and it's not just goodwill, actually. It's belief and generosity and hope. And the thing is, people, humans, individuals can only do so much before those personal sacrifices they're making to keep those systems going just become too great. And that's the political point of the show, I guess, if there is one. And it does feel very timely because we're recording this on the 1st of February when half the world is going out on strike saying, we can't do this anymore.
I want to sort of talk a little bit about attitudes towards the NHS, which you sort of touched on there, and gratitude for the NHS, because this is not a comment about doctors or people who work within the NHS. I'm tremendously grateful that those people want to continue working in the NHS, particularly given, where we are in the world at the moment. But about, I think, politicians and the system, really. And I think that we almost fetishise the NHS. And we make it this sort of magical unicorn that can do no wrong. I think what Maternal shows is that is not the case. The system is like any, it's fallible, right? And things can and do go wrong. And it would be weird, really, if they didn't, to be honest. Yeah. But we are grateful for it in a way that sometimes puzzles me a little bit, because it's almost like, well, we're not America. So let's be grateful because we're not America. But we are a first world country. And having a healthy population makes good economic sense. The NHS isn't given to us out of, just the goodness of politicians' hearts. And we're not given it. We do pay for it. We pay for it for our taxes. Because I think we worry so much that it's going to be privatised, basically, that we're like, we mustn't criticise it. And like the BBC, we mustn't criticise it because we're so lucky to have it. We don't want them to take it away from us. Do you think we actually help it by holding it up to this sort of magical standard?
I think that's really astute. I think there's something that we have done with the NHS, which is, it's become a mythology in this country. And what that means is that politicians are terrified to touch it because they think that as soon as they start to try and reform it, or as soon as they start to try and change it, people will hear we're privatising it or we're fundamentally changing something, and people have a very, very emotional attachment to the NHS, which is completely understandable because that is the organisation, those are the individuals that you turn to at the most vulnerable points in your life. So, I think all of us will have a story about that moment of vulnerability when the NHS or people within that organisation held our hands. And also, I think Maternal is to some extent a part of that, because we're telling stories about the NHS that keep this mythology alive. And look, I don't know how to fix it. I'm not a politician. I'm a storyteller. I can listen to a few podcasts and, recount a couple of things that were said on it, but I don't know. And I guess it's that thing again, isn't it? And I'm really pleased you picked up on some of the themes in Maternal, that there is a direct conflict, isn't there, between sort of an individual and the forces outside of them that are pushing down on them. But I think all of the individuals within the system that is like the NHS are also fighting on all sorts of different angles, from the inefficiencies of the system itself, from the inbuilt sexism within the system itself, from the pressures of the their colleagues, of the, the equipment. It's all of that stuff. And I think for the women as well, and we don't sort of kind of this straight on in season 1, but it's certainly a story I would like to go on and tell if we're able to build on season 1. That is that I think medicine, like every other system, was built by men 150 years ago for men. There's still so much. I'm sure your listeners are so familiar with all of the conditions and all of the problems that medicine doesn't even acknowledge are those things because they happen to women. I mean, Jesus, if men had to give birth, do you think they would still be pushing things the size of a watermelon out of their genitalia?
All the time. It's medieval. If men had to do it, they'd have found a better way.
Absolutely. So even the system of knowledge by which these women are trained, and I'm not just talking about the way that you're trained or the systems, the way that surgery is structured, which is hugely sexist and misogynist. Even the knowledge that you're handed over is about men. It's about male bodies. So no, it's not straightforward, and it is nuanced, and also there are no villains. I don't think. I don't think that there's a wonderful character played beautifully by Matt Fraser in episodes 1 and 3. So when Mariam sort of has to go and find some help from within the hospital, she goes and talks to, I can't remember exactly what they're called. It's not quite HR, patient safety and something or other. They have a very long title, which is real. He's an antagonist in that scene, and doesn't provide everything that Mariam needs in that moment. But even he, there's a drama about him and all of the difficulties, all the ways that he's not fully able to do his job properly, and all the people that are leaning on him to do things differently. So yeah, it is nuanced. There are no villains and there are no heroes. It's just humans trying to do their best.
Some of the issues you touch on, like burnout, like psychological issues, trauma, of the doctors working for the NHS at different levels. And in particular, there is one, I think, incredibly unsympathetic character who, like that, goes to being... like, you completely change your opinion on him in a heartbeat because you realise what he's dealing with. Because that is sort of COVID related as well. Do you think that is an accurate kind of representation of what is happening to people in the NHS at the moment? Because one of the things that interested me about Maternal was it was like I was watching something about something I'm so familiar with, and yet at the same time, it was a completely different perspective. You're like, oh shit, is that a thing?
I do, yeah. I think burnout and mental health is a massive issue for the NHS at the moment. I don't have the statistics next to me, but the amount of people who are leaving the NHS on a monthly basis is staggering at the moment. And that is mostly burnout. People just saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't work at this level of intensity. And also, I think that medics are trained, well, I know this from the research that I've done, medics are trained to be very resilient. It's all about the patients. It's not about you. You show up. You keep showing up. Whatever else is happening, you turn up for that shift. I'm certainly not the first person to observe that. I think if you go back and read any medical kind of biography, Adam Kay talks about it beautifully in This Is Gonna Hurt. And I think he says that beautiful thing at the end, doesn't he? But you've got to be prepared that your mistakes are going to hurt people. And that's really hard. And I think particularly when you come back and you've had a baby, it means something very different, I think. So yes, it is a big deal in the NHS at the moment. I think it's a particularly big deal after COVID because people have been working at a rate of intensity that they're not used to. And also, I think an awful lot of doctors through COVID were either sequestered into other specialties. So people who might have been doing orthopedics, which is bad knees. Mm-hmm. Every orthopedic person listening is going to be absolutely furious that I just said that, but essentially it's joints. You don't see a lot of death in that specialty because, you're coming in for hip replacements, you're coming in for joint, like you're not dealing with people who are at the end of their lives, usually. If you're an ICU doctor or if you're an acute medic, you're much more used to dealing with that level of death. Although, again, the levels that we had during COVID were just off the charts, and they were young people, otherwise fit and healthy people. And I think doctors talk to me about what they usually put around death to protect themselves from it, so to give us a process. People not being able to be with their families, people not being able to have those last moments and not being able to facilitate that was really traumatizing for those doctors. And if you were one of our doctors who was a consultant on the show, was a pediatrician, hadn't done adult medicine for probably 15 years, was on one of the COVID wards, was told, right, we need you on a COVID ward. So suddenly she was back working in adult medicine again, which is not her specialty, not something that she's done for a long time, dealing with people dying, and there also not being very much that people could do. And I think that's another thing that medics found really, really hard, is that they would be looking at otherwise fit and healthy people who should have had another 20, 30, 40 years of life and going, we don't know how to help you. And I think everybody's still processing that because there hasn't been a break. You know, the hospital admissions and the rates at which people are working hasn't reduced after that. So yes, I think COVID is a big deal. Without giving spoilers away, what happens to that character that you're talking about in the show happens with heartbreaking frequency.
Well, first of all, I have to ask, even if you know at this stage you're probably not able to tell me, will there be more Maternal, please? Please?
We don't know. I genuinely don't know. It's that horrible bit where you're just waiting for people to make a decision. So I don't know. I hope so. We shall see.
I've got a good feeling for you, Jacqui, because it's gone down so well, hasn't it? Like the reception has been incredible.
I think. I mean, I don't read the reviews. I try really hard not to. When it's all over, I sit with a cup of tea. I sit with a press pack and a big bit of chocolate cake. So if someone says something mean, I can take a very large mouthful of chocolate cake whilst I think about that. But I think it's important to get a sense of your own, I guess, your own criteria as an artist for what you wanted to achieve and whether you think that you've achieved it, and allow reviews and other people's opinions on that to feed into that rather than dictate it. That is an important distinction for me, and I don't always find it. And I am finding the waiting to know whether we've got a season 2 really tough. But, you know, it's out of my hands.
Well, I'm keeping everything crossed for you and indeed me, Jacqui. So I note that there is another show in development at the moment. Can you tell us anything about that?
I don't think I can, no. I'm sorry. I'm working on 2 other things at the moment with the same team that I work with to do Maternal, which is wonderful. They're brilliant. And with another brilliant but very different set of people. And I can't talk about either of them except to say that it's such a privilege to suddenly be a writer, because for 20 years it's been my dream that I would be. And I do have to pinch myself a little bit that this is happening now. This is really what I do every day.
Jacqui, where can we follow you on the socials if we want to keep up to date with what you're doing next? And whether or not there'll be any more Maternal, please, yes, please, ITV.
I'm only on Twitter because I got locked out of my Instagram account when someone hacked it and I can't work out how to get back in again. I'm too old. and I gave up on Facebook a really long time ago as well. So I'm at Jacqui HM, JACQUIHM on Twitter.
Jacqui, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. It's been joyous.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I could have spent all day chatting to you.